The morning it started, I was standing at the counter with my hands in a bowl of white flour that was not the flour my mother-in-law had always sent over in a cloth sack. I was 23 years old. The window above the sink was fogged from the kettle, and outside, past the fog, I could see the shape of the barn going gray in the early light. I remember the flour was finer than what I was used to, softer under my fingers, and I remember thinking, before I thought of anything else, that it felt nice. That is the whole of what happened. I bought a different flour without asking anyone. And before the week was out, I understood that a woman's hands are not only her own, not even in a bowl, not even at 6 in the morning, not even for something as small as bread. I did not know that yet, standing there. I only knew the flour felt nice. I would learn the rest the way Amish women always learn things, quietly, sideways, from the corner of someone else's mouth, while their hands kept moving. My name is Hannah. This is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where I tell the stories I was never permitted to tell out loud. Not to my mother, not to my sisters, not even, for a long time, to myself. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio. I was married at 19. I left at 26. If you are new here, I want you to know that I am not here to entertain you with cruelty. I am here because I spent years believing that what happened to me did not have a name, and I have since learned that it does, and that naming things is sometimes the only door out of a room you did not know was locked. If you have a moment, hit subscribe, and if this story is one that finds you somewhere true, tap like so it can find someone else too. And I want to ask you something, the way I ask at the start of every story. Have you ever made a small choice, so small you almost forgot you made it, and watch the people around you treat it like a crime? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back. In the outside world, a woman buys flour. She reads the labels, she compares the prices, she decides. In my community, a woman buys the flour her mother-in-law sends, in the sack her mother-in-law sends it in, and she does not ask why, because asking why is its own small rebellion. We did not call it control. We did not have that word yet. I will come back to the word later. Because a woman in a beige office eventually gave it to me, along with several others I did not know I needed. What we called it instead was the Ordnung, the unwritten rule that is never written down and yet somehow everyone knows. The way you know a room is cold before you have thought the word cold. The Ordnung told us how wide our hems should be and how our hair should be pinned, and underneath all of that, it told us something larger, that there is an order to things. God at the top, then the bishop, then the husband, then the wife, then the children, each one folding down into the one beneath it like a hand folding into a fist. We called it Gelassenheit, yielding. It was not a punishment, they told us. It was a gift, a lightness, the relief of never having to decide anything for yourself. Pride, Hochmut, was the sin they warned the girls about most. More than any other sin, more than lying, more than anger. A girl with an opinion was a girl with Hochmut. A woman who bought her own flour was a woman who thought her own judgment mattered more than the order that had been laid out for her since before she was born. Everyone knew this. No one said it. It did not have an official name, this thing that happened to women who stepped an inch outside the line, but it existed the way many things in Amish life exist, fully, completely, and never once spoken aloud. I married a man named Amish. We met the way most of us met, at a Sunday singing, in a barn strung with lanterns, boys on one side of the table and girls on the other, though by the end of the night the sides always blurred a little. He was quiet. He had large, careful hands, the hands of someone who had been working since he was 6 years old, and he did not say much, but when he did say something, he looked right at you while he said it, and that felt like a rare thing among the boys I knew. We were married on a Thursday in late October. 300 people came. There were 4 hours of preaching before anyone ate a bite, and then there was roast chicken and creamed celery and, I am not exaggerating, 7 kinds of pie laid out on the long tables in the yard, because my aunts had been baking for a week straight and would not be told there were too many pies. I want to say something here that I say in nearly every story I tell, because it matters more than almost anything else I could tell you. Amish was not cruel. I need you to hear that clearly because it is the part people skip past when they want a villain, and I am not going to give you one. He was a man raised inside the same silence I was raised inside. He did not invent the rules any more than I did. He inherited them, the way you inherit a coat that does not fit quite right, but that everyone tells you was tailored just for you. Our first child, a girl, came within the year. I remember holding her in the low lamplight and feeling, for the first time in my life, something that was entirely, fiercely mine. I did not know yet how much that feeling would cost me. 2 years into the marriage, on an ordinary Tuesday, I drove the buggy into town for thread and stopped, almost without deciding to, at the dry goods store. My mother-in-law had always sent over her flour, a particular brand in a particular cloth sack, the way she had sent it to every daughter-in-law before me. I do not know what made me buy a different one that day. Maybe it was only that the bag was on sale. Maybe it was something smaller than a reason at all. Maybe it was simply that, for once, I wanted a small object in my life to be a thing I had chosen. I baked with it that Wednesday. The bread came out finer, lighter, and Amos ate 2 slices at supper and said nothing about it, which I took, foolishly, as a kind of permission. By Thursday, the cold had already begun. Amos did not raise his voice. He never has. Not once. Not in all the years I knew him. What he did instead, that Thursday and the days that followed, was something harder to name and much harder to survive. He simply stopped speaking to me in the particular way he had always spoken to me. Good morning became a nod. Supper was eaten in a silence so complete I could hear the clock on the mantel counting each second like it was keeping score. I waited for him to be angry. I waited for him to say something, anything, even something sharp. He said nothing at all. Nothing. That was the whole of it. Nothing. On Friday, my mother-in-law came by, ostensibly to check on the baby, and stood in my kitchen with her hands moving over a basket of mending while she said, without looking at me, "A wife who lets the cold in cannot complain when the house freezes." Her hands did not stop moving the entire time she spoke. That was how the women in my family delivered warnings. Hands busy, eyes down, words dropped like stones into a well so shallow you could hear them land. I told her it was only flour. She smiled the way you smile at a child who has said something that reveals just how much they still have to learn, and she said, "It is never only flour, Hannah." And then she asked whether I had enough onions put up for the winter, and the conversation was over. By the following week, my sister-in-law stopped by with a jar of chow chow and stayed for coffee. And somewhere between the second and third cup, she mentioned, the way you mention weather, that a woman 2 districts over had once bought her own seed corn instead of waiting for her husband to choose it. And that woman's garden had failed 3 years running. And wasn't that a strange thing to have happened? I understood, even as she said it, that she was not talking about seed corn. Then came the bishop's wife, unannounced, on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting stiffly at my table with her hands folded and her eyes moving slowly around my kitchen as though she were taking an inventory of everything I had failed to keep in order. She did not mention the flour either. She asked how the baby was sleeping and whether Amos's mother had been over lately, and whether I had been feeling at peace. I told her I had been feeling fine. She said that was good to hear, and that peace was a thing a woman built with her hands, not a thing that simply arrived. And then she left, and the kitchen felt colder after she was gone than it had before she came, though nothing about the temperature of the room had actually changed. This is the part I want you to understand. If you understand nothing else from this story, the pressure was never loud, not once. It was the slow withdrawal of warmth from a room, the dropping of the temperature by 1 degree at a time, so gradual that you cannot point to the moment it became unbearable, only that one day you notice your hands are shaking, and you cannot remember when they started. There was a woman in our district named Lydia, not young, past 60, a widow who kept mostly to herself, and was known for the evenness of her stitching more than for anything she said. I did not expect her to be the one who spoke to me plainly, but she was. It happened at a quilting frolic, 3 weeks into the cold. I was threading a needle and my hands would not stop trembling, badly enough that I dropped the thread twice. And Lydia, without looking up from her own work, reached over and took the needle from my hands and threaded it herself. "They do not hit us," she said, still not looking at me, her hands moving steadily over the fabric. "That is not our way. What they do is harder." She tied off a knot, snipped the thread, and set the needle back in my palm. I lost one, at the end, she said. Not a child. A version of myself. You do not get her back by staying quiet longer. I tried that. It does not work that way. Then she picked up her own square of fabric and went back to her stitching. And she did not say another word to me for the rest of the afternoon. And I understood that she had just told me something she had never told anyone. Sideways, without eye contact, the way the truth always seemed to travel among the women I knew. Never handed over directly. Only left somewhere you would trip over it if you were paying attention. I have thought about Lydia more times than I can count in the years since. She died the winter before I left. I never got to tell her that I heard her. If you have stayed with me this long, thank you. I know these stories are not easy to sit with, and I do not take it lightly that you are still here. If you have not already, I would ask you to subscribe, so that the next story finds you too. There is so much more I have not yet said, about the year after this one, about the bishop's parlor with the pie sitting untouched on the windowsill, about the daughter I raised to ask questions I was never permitted to ask. But that is a different video. For now, let me tell you what happened after the frolic, because the coldest part of the story had not yet arrived. 4 weeks after the flower, the bishop came to the house himself. He arrived in the late afternoon, tall, gray-bearded, moving with the unhurried calm of a man who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. Amos made coffee. There was a pie on the windowsill, my mother-in-law's doing, though I never learned exactly when she had brought it by. The bishop did not scold me. That was the thing about him. He never scolded. He simply sat across the table with his hands wrapped around his coffee cup and spoke gently, so gently, about the importance of a woman trusting the wisdom laid out for her, about how the community was not trying to take anything from me, but only trying to hold me the way a fence holds a field, keeping it whole rather than letting it scatter. "We do not want to lose you, Hannah," he said, and it was said so kindly that it took me years to understand it had also been a warning. I said very little that afternoon. I remember looking past his shoulder out the window at the gray fields going flat under the coming winter light, and thinking that I had bought a bag of flour, and somehow it had brought a bishop to my kitchen table. Nothing happened to me that day, not officially. There was no formal confession required, no kneeling before the congregation, not for something as small as flour. That tier of consequence was reserved for larger transgressions, the kind I would come to understand more fully in later years. But something in me understood, sitting there, that the smallness of the trigger was the entire point. It did not matter that it was only flour. What mattered was that the system had shown me, in patient, unhurried detail, exactly how much machinery could be set in motion by one small woman making one small choice, and exactly how quickly the warmth of an entire community could be withdrawn and then, just as carefully, restored, once I had learned the lesson they wanted me to learn. The warmth did come back, eventually. Amos spoke to me again by December, first in short sentences, then, slowly, in whole ones. My mother-in-law resumed sending her flour, and I used it without comment. And no one ever mentioned the other bag again, as though it had never existed, as though I had never for one Tuesday morning stood at my counter with my hands in something that was entirely my own. But something in me did not come back the way the rest of it did. I kept the memory of that fine, soft flour the way you keep a stone in your apron pocket, small, hard, carried without anyone else knowing it was there, taken out sometimes at night to be turned over in the dark. I want to tell you about the morning, 3 years later, when I finally understood I would leave, though I will not tell the story of the leaving itself today. That belongs to a different video. What I will tell you is where the decision arrived, because it did not arrive the way you might expect, in anger or in a single dramatic scene. It arrived while I was standing at that same kitchen window, years on, watching snow come down over a field that had already been harvested and put to rest for the winter. I was hanging laundry that had been drying near the stove, and I found myself looking at the long row of Amos's shirts on the line, sleeve after sleeve after sleeve, and I thought, without any drama at all, the way you know a season has changed before the calendar tells you so, I do not choose anything here. Not the flour, not the shirts, not the shape of my own days. The thought did not arrive like a storm. It arrived the way frost arrives on a window overnight, quietly, completely, so that by morning the whole pain is covered and you cannot say exactly when it started. I will not tell you today how I left, only that when I did, I carried one bag, and I walked to a phone shanty 2 miles down the road in the dark, and a Mennonite woman I had met only twice in my life came and got me before sunrise, and did not ask me a single question I was not ready to answer. What came after was its own kind of cold. Letters I sent that were returned unopened, a telephone that rang and rang into a silence I eventually stopped trying to fill. My father's face the last time I saw him, looking through me as though I had already become something made of glass, something you could see straight past without meaning to be unkind about it. My sisters, when I saw them in town years later, crossed the street. I do not believe they meant it as cruelty either. I believe, the way I believe most things now, that they were doing the only thing the system had ever taught them how to do, with someone who had stepped outside its lines. I found a therapist 2 years after I left, a small English woman with reading glasses she was always misplacing, and a row of plants along her windowsill that she talked to more than she probably meant to admit. It was in her beige little office, on an ordinary Tuesday, that I first heard the term coercive control, and I remember sitting very still while she explained it, because it was as though someone had finally handed me a key to a door I had been quietly beating my fists against for years, without knowing there was a door there at all. She was the one who taught me that consent is not a door you walk through once at an altar and never think of again. She was the one who said, in that quiet, patient way of hers, that the most effective systems of control are the ones that feel exactly like love, and that a community that cannot hold your questions does not actually trust its own answers. She gave me the phrase emotional withdrawal as punishment and the phrase community-enforced compliance. And I remember sitting in her office turning those words over the way I once turned over that stone of flour in my apron pocket. Except this time, the weight of it felt like it was finally being set down instead of carried. I want to be careful here because I have told you a hard story, and it would be easy for you to walk away from it thinking I hate the people in it. I do not. My husband was not a monster. He was a man raised inside the same silence I was raised inside, handed a coat that did not fit him any better than mine fit me. The system is the thing, not the people. I do not hate the Amish. I do not hate my mother-in-law, who spoke to me in Proverbs because Proverbs were the only language she had ever been given for hard things. I do not hate the bishop, who believed, I think genuinely, that he was holding a field together rather than fencing a woman in. That community gave me things too. A work ethic that has served me every day since, a faith that, in its better moments, was not a cage but a kind of shelter, and sisters, in the truest sense. Women who braided my hair and sat beside me at every quilting frame, and would have laid down in the road for me if it had ever come to that. I do not tell you this story to erase any of that. I tell it because both things are true at once, the shelter and the cage. And learning to hold both without letting either one cancel out the other has been some of the hardest and most necessary work of my life. If you grew up in a place where your body was not entirely your own, I see you. If you have ever made a choice so small, a bag of flour, a different color of thread, 3 words spoken once at a table, and watched the temperature of a room drop in response, I see you. If you were ever told that being good meant making yourself smaller and smaller until there was nothing left of you large enough to refuse with, I see you. You were not weak. You were surviving inside a system that was built, carefully and patiently, to make sure you could never refuse without paying for it. The framework was the mistake, not you. Before you go, tell me in the comments what part of this story stayed with you the longest. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. And if you have your own story, a small choice that cost you more than it should have, I want you to know that you can tell me whenever you are ready. I read every single one. Subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There is so much more I have not yet said. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life. Your no is a whole sentence. It always was.